For nearly 3 centuries, the Ming Dynasty believed its northern frontier was secure. Stone walls, fortified cities, massive armies, all standing between China and the chaos beyond. But in 1621, that illusion shattered. From the frozen forest of Manchuria rose a new power, fast, disciplined, ruthless, led by a man with a single vision. This was the Battle of Shen Liao, the moment the Northeast fell and the fate of a dynasty began to turn. By the early 17th century, the Ming Empire was rotting from within. Court politics poisoned decisions, treasuries ran dry, soldiers went unpaid. The empire looked strong, but its foundations were crumbling. Beyond the Great Wall, the Georgian tribes were no longer divided. Under Nurhaci, they were forged into a single war machine. The 8-banner system bound loyalty, family, and warfare into one force. A force built for conquest. In 1618, Nurhaci declared his 7 grievances. War was inevitable. By 1621, the stone was ready to break. At the head of the Manchu armies stood Nurhaci himself, a veteran warlord, scarred by battle, driven by destiny. Opposing him were Ming officials tasked with defending Liaodong, led by Yuan Jingtai. On paper, the Ming had everything: numbers, fortresses, artillery. In reality, they had confusion, fear, hesitation. The Manchus had unity, and they were advancing. The Shen Liao campaign exploded across Liaodong with terrifying speed. Nurhaci struck like lightning, avoiding long sieges, crushing Ming-filled armies before help could arrive. Manchu cavalry severed roads and supply lines. Garrisons were isolated, starving. Outside Zhenjiang, Ming formations collapsed under relentless pressure. Soon after, the walls of Liaoyang, once thought unbreakable, were breached. Orders contradicted each other. Units fled, entire defenses dissolved into panic. Smoke rose over Liaodong. In weeks, what had taken decades to build was gone. The Northeast had fallen. Shen Liao was more than a defeat. It handed Nurhaci the industrial heart of the Northeast. Cities, workshops, weapons. It proved the Ming could be broken, not just resisted. And it sent shockwaves through China. Because the enemy was no longer at the gates. They were already inside. The Ming retreated behind the Great Wall, desperately trying to hold what remained. Nurhaci made Zhenjiang his capital, turning conquest into permanence. Though he will die in 1626, the path was already set. His successor will march south, past the Great Wall, and seize Beijing. In 1644, the Ming Dynasty will fall. And it all began here, in 1621, with the Battle of Shen Liao, when the North was lost and an empire's fate was sealed. By 1939, China was still standing, but barely. 2 years of invasion, cities erased, millions displaced. The Japanese advance rolled onwards, relentless, methodical, unstoppable, or so it seemed. Then, in the spring of 1939, China chose to strike back. At a river crossroad in Jiangxi, a city called Nanchang. This was not a raid, not a skirmish. This was China's first great counteroffensive, a gamble against defeat, and a test of survival. Since 1937, the war had gone disastrously wrong for China. Beijing failed, Shanghai failed, Nanjing failed, followed by massacre and terror. By 1938, Japan controlled China's coast, its railways, and much of its industry. In the interior, Nanchang became a linchpin, a logistics hub, a river port, a launch point for deeper invasion. If Nanchang fell, southern China lay exposed. So Chinese commanders made a decision, dangerous, desperate, necessary. They will go on the offensive. The offensive fell to General Su Yu, one of China's most capable commanders. Under him, more than 200,000 soldiers. Many poorly armed, many exhausted, all carrying the weight of defeat. Opposing them, Japan's 11th Army, commanded by General Yasushi Okamura. Fewer men, but better trained, backed by artillery and absolute control of the air. This will not be a fair fight. On March 20th, 1939, the offensive began. Chinese armies surged forward, crossing rivers, striking from multiple directions, catching Japanese garrisons off balance. Positions fell. Supply routes were cut. For once, momentum shifted. On March 27th, Chinese troops entered Nanchang. Japanese forces withdrew. The city was reclaimed. Across China, hope returned. But victory was fragile. Japanese aircraft filled the skies, bombing roads, bridges, supply depots. Artillery hammered Chinese lines. Reinforcements closed in. Chinese units became isolated, exhausted, outgunned. By early April, the offensive collapsed. On May 9, 1939, Japanese troops re-entered Nanchang. On paper, Nanchang was a defeat. But in truth, it was something more. China had planned, coordinated, and executed a massive offensive. Japan had been forced to react, to bleed, to fight hard for occupied ground. Most importantly, the myth was broken. Japan was not invincible. After Nanchang, China changed how it fought. Fewer grand offensives, more endurance, more attrition. Japan kept the city, but paid for it in blood, fuel, and time. Later that year, at Changsha, Japan will be stopped again. The war will drag on for 6 more years. The Battle of Nanchang did not end the war, but it marked the moment China stopped running and chose to fight back. The year is 200 CE, and China is tearing itself apart. The Han Dynasty, once eternal, is collapsing into dust. Armies march without mercy, cities burn, the empire bleeds. Two men rise from the chaos. One commands overwhelming numbers, ancient noble blood, and the power of the north. The other stands with fewer soldiers, but sharper minds and an iron will. When they meet at Wandu, the future of China will be decided in fire and ash. By the late 2nd century, the Han Emperor still wore the crown, but held no power. Real authority belonged to warlords. Cao Cao controlled the emperor himself, ruling in his name, wielding legitimacy like a blade. Yuan Shao controlled the land, vast armies, endless supplies, the prestige of an ancient noble house. To many, the outcome was already decided. In the spring of 200 CE, Yuan Shao marched south with more than 100,000 men. Cao Cao could barely gather 40,000. China held its breath. Yuan Shao was powerful, but divided within himself. He hesitated, listened to too many voices, moved too slowly when moments demanded action. Cao Cao was different. Cold, calculating, relentlessly decisive. Where Yuan Shao hesitated, Cao Cao struck. At Wandu, Cao Cao dug in, outnumbered, surrounded, and defiant. He was betting everything. Yuan Shao attacked again and again. His army crashed against Cao Cao's defenses, like waves against stone. Arrows darkened the sky, the ground ran red. Weeks passed, food ran low, morale cracked. Even Cao Cao's officers whispered of retreat. Then, a spark in the darkness. Through spies and defectors, Cao Cao learned the truth. Yuan Shao's lifeline, the supply depot at Wuchao, lay exposed. It was a gamble, a single throw of the dice. Under cover of night, Cao Cao rode out with a small elite force. They struck like ghosts. Wuchao burned. Food, weapons, hope itself were consumed by flame. By dawn, Yuan Shao's army began to unravel. Confusion became panic. Orders went unanswered. Soldiers fled. Cao Cao attacked. The siege collapsed into chaos. The larger army broke first. Wandu was more than a battle. It shattered the myth that numbers alone win wars. It proved that intelligence could defeat strength, that decisiveness could overcome hesitation. From the ashes of Wandu, Cao Cao emerged as master of northern China. The age of the Three Kingdoms had begun. Yuan Shao survived, but his power did not. His armies scattered, his authority crumbled. After his death, his sons tore each other apart. Cao Cao advanced north, victory by victory, until no rival remained. The Han Dynasty still breathed, but only in name. At Wandu, Cao Cao did not just win a battle. He seized the future. By 1809, Europe had learned to fear a single name: Napoleon Bonaparte. His armies had shattered coalitions, toppled thrones, and redrawn the map of a continent. Victory seemed inevitable. But north of Vienna, beside the wide, silent waters of the Danube, that certainty will be tested. Here, on the place of Wagram, Napoleon will fight not just an enemy, but the limits of his own power. For nearly 20 years, Europe had been at war. Revolution had become empire, and empire demanded obedience. Austria had been defeated before, humiliated, forced to kneel. But in 1809, Vienna believed the moment had come. Napoleon was distracted. His armies bled in Spain. His empire stretched thin. So Austria struck, launching the War of the Fifth Coalition. And then, the impossible happened. At Asper-Essling, Napoleon was stopped. Now both sides prepared for a final reckoning. Napoleon commanded a massive army, French veterans and reluctant allies from across Europe. Numbers gave him strength, but numbers also hid weakness. Opposing him stood Archduke Charles, Austria's finest general, patient, methodical, unshaken by Napoleon's legend. Charles had studied his enemy, adapted to him, and he believed Napoleon could be beaten. At dawn on July 5, 1809, the guns opened fire. The Marschfeld shook as over 300,000 men collided. Musket fire tore through smoke, cavalry charged, men vanished into chaos. The first day brought no decision. Austria's lines held, French assaults bled themselves dry. By nightfall, Napoleon's army was exhausted, and the battle was slipping away. At dawn on July 6th, Napoleon made his gamble. He massed his artillery, more than 100 guns, into a single thunderous blow. The ground trembled. The Austrian center began to tear apart. Then, Marshal MacDonald advanced, a massive column marching into a storm of fire. Men fell by the thousands. But the line broke. Archduke Charles ordered retreat. After 2 days of slaughter, Wagram belonged to Napoleon. Wagram was victory, but it was not triumph. More than 70,000 men lay dead or wounded. The empire was saved, but the cost was undeniable. Napoleon had won, not with elegance, but with exhaustion. Europe was learning. The emperor could bleed. Austria sued for peace. The Treaty of Schönbrunn stripped the empire of land and power. Napoleon married into the Habsburg dynasty, binding victory with diplomacy. But something had changed. The wars were growing heavier, the victories harder to win. Wagram was the peak. From here on, every step forward will lead closer to the fall. By 1939, Imperial Japan believed the war in China was already won. Great cities had fallen, armies had collapsed, resistance was fading. From Tokyo to the front lines, victory felt inevitable. But in the humid heart of south-central China, one city refused to surrender. Changsha. In the autumn of 1939, Japan will suffer something it had not yet faced on land. defeat. The Second Sino-Japanese War had already torn China apart. Beijing, Shanghai, Nanjing, Wuhan. Each city lost left deeper scars behind. When Wuhan fell in 1938, Japan believed the outcome was sealed. All that remained was to break China's will to fight. Chang'e stood in the way. It controlled rivers, railways, and the gateway to southern China. If Chang'e fell, the interior lay open. Defending Chang'e was General Xu Yu, a commander who understood a hard truth. China could not win by strength alone. It had to outlast. Xu Yu prepared not for a glorious stand, but for a war of exhaustion. Across the field stood Japan's 11th Army, veteran troops, battle-hardened officers. They had never been stopped before. Chang'e was supposed to fall like the rest. In September 1939, the Japanese advance began. Chinese units withdrew, step by step. To the Japanese, it looked like collapse. But it was a trap. As Japanese forces pushed forward, the supply lines stretched thin. Roads vanished into mud. Rivers overflowed. Then the monsoon rains came. The land itself turned hostile. That was when the Chinese struck. Ambushes at night, snipers in the rain, relentless pressure from every direction. By the time the Japanese reached Chang'e, they were exhausted, bleeding. Chinese forces surged forward. Supply routes were cut. Retreat was blocked. Surrounded, starving, and under constant attack, the offensive collapsed. In early October 1939, the order was given. Retreat. Chang'e still stood. The Battle of Chang'e sent shockwaves across Asia. For the first time in the war, Japan had suffered a major land defeat. For China, it was more than a victory. It was proof. Proof that Japan could be stopped. Proof that resistance still mattered. Chang'e became a symbol in a war filled with despair. The war did not end at Chang'e. The city will be attacked again and again. The fighting will only grow more brutal. But the first battle changed everything. General Xu Yu's strategy slowed Japan's advance across China. In a war defined by loss, Chang'e stood apart, a city that refused to fall.